So some people are still entering the webinar, and thank you for everyone for joining us today. I just again want to say welcome to the Kenya S. Flash virtual lecture series in librarianship. This is a free online annual speaker series dedicated in honor of our beloved colleague, the late Kenya Flash. The series is sponsored by the ACRL Politics, Policy, and International Relations section, PIPERS, and the ALA Government Documents Roundtable, or GODOR. Today's inaugural lecture is entitled The Participatory Promise of Digital Community Engagement Toward an Equitable, Trustworthy, Scholarly Communication System, and will be delivered by Willa Liburd Tavernier. But before we begin, we thought it would be appropriate to say a few words about Kenya and her legacy. The following is a short biographical account and also some reflections of what she meant to me as a friend and a colleague. I also want to preface this by saying that although I have given many presentations, I've never felt so inadequate to the task of paying Kenya a fitting tribute. Kenya earned her bachelor's degree in government and law from Lafayette College, an MA in political science from East Stroudsburg University, and an MS in Library and Information Sciences from Drexel University. She was a librarian at King's College and the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, before joining the Marx Science and Social Science Library at Yale University in 2017, where she served as the librarian for political science, global information, and government information until her untimely passing in December 2021. Kenya provided instruction, research support, and collection development for the Department of Political Science and Global Affairs, and for the programs in ethnicity, race and migration, and ethics, politics, and economics at Yale. Her expertise in these disciplines was demonstrated in the many in-depth research guides she created and the glowing testimonies of the students and faculty she helped. Kenya was a passionate advocate and educator for government information, her interests ranging from the state and local to the international. One of her aspirations, which we often spoke about, was to found an international relations boot camp for librarians. She was also a lecturer at the University of Illinois School of Information Studies, where she co-taught a class on government information with Scott Matheson, now serving as the superintendent of documents. Kenya was also a noted author and speaker. Among her many published works was the book Ethnic Studies in Academic and Research Libraries, edited with Ray Pun and Melissa Cardenas-Dow, published in 2021 by ACRL, as well as Assumed Identity, Realities of Afro-Caribbean Librarians in the Black Librarian in America, Reflections, Resistance, and Reawakening. Early in her career, Kenya presented at the International Federation of Library Associations, or IFLA, and was instrumental in recruiting NPR's Hansi Lo Wang to speak at Counting on Trust, Trusting the Count, Census 2020, sponsored by GODOR and the Social Responsibilities Roundtable at the ALA Annual Conference in 2019. So as you can see, the list of her remarkable accomplishments goes on and is extensive. But above all, Kenya was a beloved colleague, friend, and community member. She was active in both PIPERS and GODOR, was elected to the PIPERS Executive Board, and served exceptionally on the PIPERS membership and professional development committees, where she was instrumental in the creation of the PIPERS webinar series, Fundamentals of International Law. She was sponsored by GODOR in ALA's Emerging Leaders Program, served as the coordinator for the International Documents Task Force, and was the GODOR representative to the ALA Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Assembly. In all of her professional activities, Kenya was both a brilliant mind and an inspirational leader who forged deep and lasting relationships with her colleagues. I'm simply at a loss for words to adequately express and give justice to the creative energy, positivity, grace, kindness, humor, and brilliance she brought to every group she joined and every person she touched. I'm sure I speak for many when I say we missed her very much. And in her memory, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence before we begin today's presentation. So thank you all very much, and I apologize for getting emotional. Let's begin today's presentation. It gives me great honor to introduce Willa. Willa Liburd Tavernier is the Research Impact and Open Scholarship Librarian at Indiana University Bloomington. She earned her MLIS from the School of Library and Information Science at the University of Iowa, together with a graduate certificate in college teaching. She also holds a Master's of Laws from American University's Washington College of Law, a legal education certificate from Norman Manley Law School, and a Bachelor of Laws from the University of West Indies at Cayville. Willa is a member of the Association of College and Research Libraries Residency Interest Group, or RIG, serving on its assessment team and subgroup on diversity residencies, a board member of the Library Publishing Coalition, and secretary of NASIG, formerly the North American Serials Interest Group. As Research Impact and Open Scholarship Librarian at Indiana University Libraries Bloomington, Willa assists faculty and graduate students in managing their research profiles and tracking and demonstrating the impact of their scholarly work. Her current research looks at equitable scholarly communication, specifically governance and sustainability from the perspectives of both systems and labor. Her talk will last for about 60 minutes, followed by Q&A. This is a webinar format presentation, so please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A, and they will be answered. So thank you very much, Willa, for joining us, and then I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for that excellent introduction, Jim. One more housekeeping matter that I'd like to mention is that we will be using stacked Q&A to provide space and priority for persons who identify as BIPOC. If you identify as Indigenous, Black, or a person of color, we invite you to put a / at the front of your question when you add it to the Q&A. With that said, welcome everybody. I'm excited to be here today, and I'm thrilled to be the inaugural speaker for the Kenya S/Virtual Lecture Series in Librarianship. Regrettably, I did not know Kenya myself. I'll get the opportunity to meet her, but I knew of her because we had mutual colleagues and overlapping via some of our professional development work. Our mutual colleague always spoke of Kenya warmly, wonderfully, and with high regard. It is my understanding that we also have the Flash family in attendance today, and I'm honored by their presence. I hope that at the end of my lecture, they will find that it did justice to Kenya's own body of work. And I know that the committee that put this lecture series together is very thankful for their support. I also very recently learned that today would have marked Kenya's 43rd year / trip around the sun, but for her passing. And that really gave me pause. For one thing, realizing that she's 3 years younger than me. And so I wanted to stop so we can let that sink in and think about that a bit. When we think of how much we give to our work in the short time that we are allotted on this. So I myself, I am an immigrant from the West Indies. I'm from St. Kitts and Nevis, which is the smallest independent nation in the Western Hemisphere. I love traveling with my family. I love fiber arts and farming in my backyard. And I also happen to be a librarian. And today I want to speak about a few projects that I've been involved in at Indiana University Bloomington Libraries, and how I've been able to start advocating for centering the concept of community in scholarly communication. As you know, this talk is called the Participatory Promise of Digital Community Engagements towards a Trustworthy, Equitable Scholarly Communication System. So I'm going to be speaking about things like digital tools, digital humanities, open pedagogy, community engagement, and classroom engagement. But in short, libraries and the academy should be paying greater attention to processes for equitable participation in scholarly communication. co-production of knowledge and community. One of the really important things that I've noted from one publication by authors Rebecca Wingo, Jason Hepler, and Paul Shadowald in Digital Community Engagement, Partnering Communities with the Academy, is that digital engagement really holds promise for this if we start with humans, not technology inventors. So I want to start with the fact that the first community we have, libraries, is comprised of library workers. It's very easy to become so consumed with productivity and having a tangible thing to show that it's somehow overlooked that we cannot produce meaningful work if we are not in environments that nurture our spirit. I've previously written in a piece entitled A Values-Driven Future for Academic Libraries that the ability to do this type of work rests on the efforts of library workers. Our spaces and materials, our systems and technologies, our digital projects, our electronic databases, and so forth, none of this happens without library workers, including the people who are turning on the lights and sweeping the floors and stacking the shelves. Ultimately, the principle of community extends to the internal community of the libraries themselves. This very complex system, the front end of which is overwhelmingly digital these days, cannot be unlinked from the materiality of the people behind it. And further, to transgress boundaries to make meaningful change, you need to include people who have already had to do this, who live with the discomfort of being an outsider in a particular space, of constantly navigating borders, and of dealing with complexities that go right to identity. So you need the perspective of Indigenous, Black and Brown people, people of color, immigrants, neurodiverse and gender diverse people, people with disabilities, and people of all sorts of religious backgrounds, because their perspective brings strengths. And libraries in the United States of America are really not doing very well on bringing these perspectives into the workforce, or once they're there in providing the support systems to retain them. These are not my opinions. This has been documented by numerous surveys, studies, and white papers. The irony is that if we took the time to put systems in place to support and retain those of us who are constantly navigating boundaries of identity, those support systems can benefit every library worker, regardless of their background. So as a precursor to engaging with the communities we serve, we need to invest in our internal communities. In this lecture, I'm going to cover 3 projects that leverage community building through co-construction of knowledge in the library and in the classroom, using digital methods as one of the tools. So the first project that I want to talk about is the public open digital scholarship resource called Land Wealth Liberation, the Making and Unmaking of Black Wealth in America. And I'd be grateful if one of the hosts can share the link to that project in the chat. A little later on, I'm going to share my screen and take you through that project. But we launched this project in March 2022. And one of the driving forces was to counterbalance decisions and priorities in collections, libraries, and the academies that have historically marginalized and excluded the experiences of communities of color, their traditions and experiences, and to disrupt the replication of this marginalization in the digital sphere. So this digital marginalization has been noted by a number of scholars across a variety of fields. Examples, if you want to look some of this up, is Kim Gallen in Making a Case for the Black Digital Humanities, Moya Bailey in All the Digital Humanists Are White, All the Nerds Are Men, but Some of Us Are Brave, and Sophia Umoja Noble in Toward a Critical Black Digital Humanities. In building the Land Wealth Liberation digital resource, we relied heavily on a wide network of librarians within the IU Bloomington Libraries and also student library workers. So we built a very diverse group of students, and this is because we took intentional action to recruit diverse students. This included direct outreach to faculty of color for recommendations, advertising in newsletters and listservs of our various campus cultural centers, specifying in the job ad that no prior experience, curricular training, or particular certifications were necessary, that we would provide on-the-job training, and using a minimal computing approach to our projects. Why? This is because students of color, though often equipped with ideal skill sets for library work, are often passed over or hesitant to apply for positions with a high degree of specificity in these sort of research, although they can do the work. They often think that they cannot or will not be considered because of prior experiences in academia.
Often rely on student workers, and in many cases,
centering how the work of the student can benefit the library in exchange for the student's ability to create a CV line around the position they have. However, if we take an approach that centers co-production, the benefit to the student workers expand beyond the CV line to learn invaluable new skills rather than just employing pre-existing skills in service of the library, to develop and expand the students' conception of what libraries do and their relationship with libraries, and as one of our student workers put it, to truly be able to envision a future within librarianship for themselves as a member of a marginalized community. So in summary, we use the following approaches: curating collections connected to the experiences of historically excluded communities, viewing student employment as a training site, identifying and intentionally counteracting hiring practices that reinforce sociocultural barriers to librarianship, balancing giving students agency with library needs or project needs, and committing to centering people in priority to productivity in our work. And that last one was very important in the Land Wealth Liberation Project because we were dealing with material that is very heavy, material that is traumatic in and of itself. And from the very beginning, we made it clear to our students that they needed to not just push through a to-do list, but take the time and space to be able to deal with the material that they were researching and writing about. Another aspect of that project was bringing archives to life. We relied heavily on scholarly books and articles, but also archival sources. The importance of telling stories using primary sources cannot be overstated. Archives allow us to reach into the past and hear the voices of communities and their members, which is especially important for communities that have been subjected to targeted destruction. So that erasure is often replicated in academia, where these stories often do not form part of curricula, and also replicated in the public sphere, where these stories are so separate and structures of power exclude them from public memory. Digital storytelling provides a means of bringing archives to life and expanding their reach beyond those with the means to visit an archives or special collections in a library, to be able to reach anyone with access to the internet. I'm indebted to my colleagues, Ursula Romero, who's at the Lilly Library, which is our Rare Books and Special Collections Library, and Christina Jones at the Education Library, both here on the IU Bloomington campus. And I think it's really useful to specifically quote both of these incredible women with whom I co-wrote a forthcoming book chapter. So Ursula Romero says, interacting with primary source material is vitally important to the understanding of history. Digital humanities methods provide new tools for making primary resources available to a wider audience, allowing hidden histories to come to life with stories told by the community members affected by racial violence. Many notable rare book libraries, including her own, were founded on collections amassed by wealthy white businessmen who collected the way one might expect a wealthy white man in the mid-20th century to collect. However, Ursula notes that many libraries, museums, and historical societies have thoughtfully preserved the histories of Black communities in the U.S. The digital resource itself is replete with primary sources from libraries across the country. Some of the material used in the digital resource and the pop-up exhibit that Ursula curated at the launch were recent acquisitions purchased in part due to their relevance to the project. Others had been in the library for a very long time, but due to their disturbing content were rarely used in classes and events. However, this is a disturbing topic, and the Land Wealth Liberation Project grapples with disturbing histories. She says, "It was my hope that visitors could look at these primary sources, some about the buying and selling of enslaved human beings, some about the inequality of school funding in the 1940s, still others about the brutal race riots in the early 20th century, and internalize what I had internalized while working on this project, that these horrific events build off of one another, that discrimination and racism are systemic, that the same stories happen over and over throughout this country's history, and that those stories are important enough to collect, preserve, showcase, and educate with. Being a rare book librarian means trying to go beyond what the collectors of the 20th century might have found worthwhile or important. In fact, I would argue that to be a really great, genuinely welcoming rare book library, one must collect, highlight, and probably showcase items with which those very collectors would have found frivolous, unimportant, offensive, abhorrent, or otherwise worthless. If a rich 20th century business tycoon found my curatorial habits acceptable, I would consider that a failure," Ursula says. Christina, who is the head of the Education Library, notes that the historical events we cover in the digital resource are all but erased in standard American history textbook. Horrific accounts of white terrorism targeting Black communities are often relegated to a footnote. Until textbook publishers have the courage to expand the narrative, it is up to individual classroom teachers to paint a more complete picture of the American story. To that end, the digital resource includes a For Educators section with lesson plans and discussion questions to liberate this history and place it along the standard historical narrative rooted in white supremacy. She also used many student workers, and she noted that through their coursework, they were aware of the partial histories offered in most public school textbooks, described as a state-approved civic truths. So coordinated and in some cases state-sanctioned violence against Black communities does a figure into the American story told to average public school students. The accounts that we feature in the digital resource are often relegated to footnotes. So what we did is supplement the partial histories contained in the pages of those, in the footnotes on those pages. And what she also says that what she learned in conversation with her student workers is that primary source documents, such as those contained in the Land Wealth Liberation digital resource, are just the sort of historical evidence needed to create a more complete picture of U.S. history. So rather than having students take the synthesized information presented in the textbook at face value, the pre-service teachers were learning how to teach young people to look critically at a primary source, such as a photo or a historic newspaper article, and draw conclusions based on evidence in the document. So thinking about community, we're starting at the point that library services and access to information have traditionally been tied to the needs of particular and well-defined populations, like disciplinary populations, campus, spatial, or ethnic communities. with the turn toward digital information and the open access movement, many academic libraries advocate for open access to scholarly information, support open access publication of scholarships through policies, mandates, library publishing, transformational agreements that where libraries fund not only subscriptions to read the articles, but also publishing funds to make those articles open access. So anyone, anywhere in the world with an internet connection can read the articles without hitting a publisher paywall, and cash available to faculty for publishing open access articles. So those initiatives position libraries as providers of access to knowledge to anyone in the world with an internet connection, beyond those disciplinary or campus or spatial communities that we traditionally think of, even as libraries are working within a complex system of publishers, vendors, platform developers, and others to form what has been referred to as a global knowledge commons. But that positioning is not without its risks, because different actors in the scholarly communication system have different motivations, and open access has not been an unqualified benefit to all communities who in which researchers conduct research. And it raises three questions. Does the pivot to open access risk losing a sense of community? What implications might this have for libraries and communities? And what should libraries do about any of it? Another thing to note is that although the public has access to increasing amounts of scholarly information through open access publication, distrust in scholarly and scientific information actually continues to rise. The distrust is not a new phenomenon, because many communities have historically, and with good reason, been distrustful of those who claim to hold authoritative scientific information. However, scholars who study the sharing of information resources observe that a key attribute of systems that successfully manage shared resources is trust. And one of the evaluative criteria to assess the robustness of such systems is legitimacy and participation. They note that participation tends to increase legitimacy, with co-production being a particularly effective method of participation and trust building. In library collaborations, for example, IU Bloomington is part of the Big Ten Academic Alliance. It's also been noted that trust develops through shared practices and is an important prerequisite to success. Black feminist scholars suggest that a Black feminist approach to distrust in science, which begins with community and is undergirded by the idea that we are all interdependent on one another, appropriately shifts the responsibility to institutions to act in a trustworthy manner. I actually want to grab that particular scholar and citation. Yolanda Wilson, who asked, is trust enough? Anti-Black racism and the perception of Black vaccine hesitancy. So community is therefore of key importance in scholarly communication, surfacing as participation and co-production. The Land-Wealth Liberation digital resource offers one way to shift and transform the relationships between libraries and different communities. Most of the work we've done in this case has been with a disciplinary community, the Black Studies scholars on our campus, but also our local community beyond the gate of the university. So I'm now going to try to share my screen so I can take you through. I can take some time to take you through the project. So managing a couple of screens becomes tricky. Can someone confirm for me from one of the host panelists that you can see the screen with the Land Wealth Liberation digital resource? Okay, great. So what inspired the conception of this work were the many narratives in the social and racial upheaval of 2020 following the murders of a number of Black citizens of the United States of America, George Floyd in particular. So there was a lot of discussion that sought to eliminate the racial dimensions of the Castle state, with the argument being that it's economic status and not race that's the primary disadvantage or risk factor for certain communities and their members when coming into contact with the systems that police our communities, the administration of justice, and the prison system. And the persons arguing that point of view failed to account for the targeted destruction of wealth in Black communities. So I can't say whether this was as a result of disingenuity, just willfully ignoring it, or actual ignorance of these things that had happened. Because the fact is that much of this history has been erased from public memory and has been excluded from what counts as the history of the United States. And efforts to sustain this erasure are currently continuing. So, for example, in 2021, 100 years after what is perhaps the most well-known incident of economic destruction, killing the futures of literally hundreds of Black families, the Tulsa Race Massacre, many Americans were saying they had never heard of the Tulsa Race Massacre before it was covered in the popular media in the HBO series Watchmen. And that observation is not meant to disparage individuals. For even myself and the other librarians and the student workers doing the research who took part in the project, in the course of the project, we realized that there was just so much more that we ourselves did not know. What the observation does, however, is illustrate the power of storytelling. So libraries now have the tools to engage in digital storytelling. And more importantly, we have the receipts by way of access to primary, secondary, and popular sources, and can now increasingly make that information available by open access to academic research. This timeline doesn't follow the typical periods you'd find in a timeline of US history, because we focus on events and turning points that were of particular importance to communities that were built by the descendants of Africans who were enslaved on the lands now known as the United States of America. So here in our introduction, we know that we are pulling stories together spanning 1820 to 2020, that's showing how formerly enslaved Africans and their descendants work to generate individual and collective capital through land ownership and creating communities. And as we were going through this, we originally intended to have different sections to the digital resource. So we were going to have like a building communities sort of timeline, then a separate destruction timeline, and we even wanted to have a migration timeline. As we did the work, it became very clear that the story really was about the targeted destruction of economic power in Black communities and of the communities themselves, and the failure of the state to act, or sometimes the state sanctioning those destructive acts. So we go from, we start at 1820 to 1865, that's our starting point. Then we go 1865 to 1921, Reconstruction to Tulsa. Tulsa marked a real turning point because according to many scholars, this is when the African-American economic community concluded that the federal government was not going to come to their aid when faced with white terrorism. And then centrally, Tulsa sits on land that belongs to the Muscogee Native American tribe. So even in thinking about destruction of communities, there were these two logics at play where you wanted to, the American project wanted to erase Native Americans and extract wealth from enslaved Africans and their descendants, which it would be more difficult to do where any of these groups had the land resources and the economic power. Then we look at, after Tulsa, the Great Depression and the New Deal. And we get into that time period where government policies, terms and conditions of when the federal government would back mortgage loans and for whom and for what types of communities. And that the whole hierarchy that they set up, including other non-white ethnic groups, and including what government documents refer to, sort of whites who are not of acceptable social classes. And we're talking about redlining, we're talking about advice to, like, if you want to separate these communities so you don't have infiltration, build a highway, so that the groups don't mix. And that led, right into urban renewal and the civil rights era. We're seeing that move from the absence of the rule of law that allowed outright violence to escalate unchecked to more to solidifying of discriminatory government policies and infrastructure projects and exclusion from the financial system, exclusion from, scholarships to attend university, exclusion from mortgages to be able to own homes, and home ownership became just the single greatest predictor of economic growth in any community in the US starting in this era. And then we go into the neoliberal economic era. And we just look at unequal investment, and we're moving from exclusion from the financial system to predatory inclusion practices in the financial system. Structural socio-economic inequality continuing even today to devastate many of these communities. And then we look at 2020 forward. And in recent years, what a lot of economists have been saying is that they're looking back at the dual economy model of development economics that's pioneered by Sir W. Arthur Lewis, who is a famous Caribbean scholar from the island of St. Lucia, Nobel Prize in Economic winner. And saying, like, this is how the United States have developed. You have these zones in which you have investment, and then you have these zones in which you have complete disinvestment. So you have two separate economies. And we invite anyone using this digital resource to go through the various time periods and examine the narratives that come out. We want these stories to spur exploration, spur people to engage in conversations, and just take new directions for the way our societies move forward. So we make all of this sort of publicly available. We also have an annotated bibliography exploring Afro-Indigenous intersections, and we also have Azotewa library that details all of the resources. We relied heavily on resources that were either open access or public access, and so that people can dig into the stories, well, the source material for the stories. We also have a stories page and a for educators page. So when we start looking at the stories, we provide a brief summary, but we also provide link outs basically to the source material that we used. And under each time period, there is a timeline. We decided to start with 1820 and the Missouri Compromise because many historians opine that the seeds of the Civil War were sown in the Missouri Compromise. And we focus on individuals as well as early Black communities and how they worked to gain economic self-sufficiency. So you can explore this at your leisure, and the For Educators page also links out to inquiry-based lesson plans developed by our School of Education students. Stop sharing my screen for a bit. So the Land Wealth Liberation digital resource was very well received. It was covered in state and national media, but it was also timely, relevant to, and resonant with the ongoing changes happening in public, community, and university libraries. At the launch, most of the discussion happened with and questions were posed by Black women farmers from our local Bloomington community. In the stories section, we have a whole section dedicated to discriminatory policies in agriculture. And these Black women farmers were able to benefit from the particular expertise of our featured speaker, Dr. Valerie Grimm, who studies this. We also created a mini collection of Dr. Grimm's work that's linked from the timeline, where we sought permission from the publishers of a lot of her work to make it openly accessible, which all except one publisher gave us. So we created a special open access collection in our university repository that is linked from the timeline. And so from the outset, we were able to provide a tangible benefit to a particular segment of our community. And for many academic librarians, the community they serve is pretty well defined. If you're a subject specialist, you have the discipline for which you're a subject librarian for. However, for functional librarians like myself, research Impact Open Scholarship, I'm not tied to a particular disciplinary community the way subject experts are, and it can be a challenge to think in terms of community in this field of scholarly communication because the boundaries of our work cut across all disciplines. At the LWL launch, Dr. Abe Gunde, who is a creative scholar and poet who works in multiple genres and is a faculty member in the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies at Indiana University, expressed keen interest in using the digital resource in her classroom. So this led to the next project. And I'm grateful to Dr. Abe Gunde for her collaborative work on that project, and indeed for her contributions to even this lecture that I'm delivering today. So in July 22, she invited myself and Deloise Holiday, who is the head of the Neil Marshall Black Culture Center Library, to join her in applying for the inaugural cohort of the American Library Association Civic Imagination Stations Grant Program. And so what we were going to do is to use the digital resource in her contemporary social issues in the African American communities course. So what we did is we obtained the grant as a teaching team to fund an open pedagogy project that would integrate the digital resource with the Black Studies and Contemplative Practices methodologies Professor Abegunde uses in her classroom. So it would deepen both approaches by inviting students to interrupt and make meaning of what they learned about the marginalization of Blackness through digital literacies, the arts, and the humanities. So we wanted to use the digital technology to address the need to construct space within the classroom and the academy to unmask racialized systems' effect on contemporary social issues. And in that case, we were looking at Black environmental experiences with water. Open pedagogy, just as a little bit of background, it's an experiential, hands-on pedagogical practice that leverages digital technology and digital scholarship and centers students. And it centers students as knowledge creators. So it utilizes open access material to have students co-create new educational material and put learners in a position of sharing their learning and sharing their knowledge, or constructing knowledge collaboratively with their peers, their professor, and through using open access materials with people far beyond the limits of the regular classroom. And this is a good summary of open pedagogy. If anyone is interested in it, is by Chiape and Adam in an article called Open Educational Practices, a Learning Way Beyond Free Access Knowledge. Then open digital scholarship that's created via open pedagogy benefits the public because it provides access to and engagement with educational and culturally enriching material beyond the boundaries of university courses, while allowing faculty and students to tackle issues of public importance in new and engaging formats. So what we did is have the digital resource serving as an additional textual resource that students could reference, explore its timelines and topics, as well as the digital methods that we use, showing them how we can use methodologies to present a counter narrative that challenges dominant narratives about, in the case of the digital resource, the racial wealth gap, and presenting just a wealth of research by Black studies scholars from archival sources, and having them think about this and apply it to their own projects where they were looking at water in Black communities. As their final project, each student created a digital project, or we had some working in groups, and their projects are collectively titled Letters to Ourselves, the A263 Water Epistles, and this then became a subpage of the Land Wealth Liberation digital resource. So the questions that we were asking in that project were, how can we share information about the global water crisis in Black communities with our peers and home communities? How can combining Black studies and digital humanities strengthen arts-based research practices and lead to relevant, resonant, and accessible outcomes for participants and target audiences? How can libraries be a site for collaboration with different communities inside or outside the university? And how can we use our new digital knowledge to research the topic further and impact change? The Civic Imagination Station grant also allowed the teaching team, again, to hire a public open digital scholarships fellow to provide additional hands-on support. And in recruiting, we use a very similar approach to when we were recruiting student workers for the initial project. And we said the pod fellow will need to be a flexible and imaginative thinker, as students enrolled in A263 will have a significant amount of latitude in thinking about their research project. Therefore, the approach the PODS Fellow will need to take is to adapt digital methodologies to meet student needs and enhance student literacy, rather than attempting to fit student projects into a particular digital vehicle. We specify that we will provide digital humanities training in collaboration with our Institute for Digital Arts and Humanities, which is jointly financed by IU Libraries and the Office of the Vice Provost for Research. And so all of this was to, redress the social barriers that typical recruitment in libraries can throw up to restrict the pool of potential applicants. By offering on-the-job training, we wanted to encourage individuals with the skills and aptitude for the position to apply, even if they lack specific qualifications or experience. So our PODS Fellow eventually was a PhD candidate in the African American and African Diaspora Studies program. He had some digital humanities exposure. He'd already worked with Deloitte, who said of the Neil Marshall Black Culture Center Library. Our team planned 6 co-teaching sessions and designed them to stimulate discussion, make space for co-construction of knowledge, and ensure that students could make informed decisions about whether and how to share their work. And we spent a lot of time in the classroom. In the last few weeks, we were in the classroom every day. There are 2 sessions that I think were really key that I'll go over, the first and the last one. So the first session introduced the digital resource. We focused on erasure, archival silence, and silence narrative. And we started, after that, we went to a personal experience with water in the Black community of Jasper County, Mississippi, shared by Deloitte. And she shared her experience where large farms surrounded their community, which relied on well water, and crop dusters would frequently spray these farms with insecticide, and there was never any advance warning. So as soon as the women of that community would hear the plane engines in the distance, women and girls in the community would grab their quills and rush to cover the wells to avoid contamination by the crop dusters. And that story prompted stimulating student discussions, and many students shared their own stories surrounding amenities in communities of color. So discussions are a really important part of co-construction of knowledge. We wanted to center student views and let them interpret and reinterpret events by providing contextual information rather than trying to impart our own viewpoint. So storytelling was key both in the classroom and in the digital resource. Before the final co-teaching session, Dr. Abe Gunde used the class time to hold a breakfast for students and have them pin down their digital method and identify their target audience, but also involve the students in actually redesigning the final project. And the students wanted more latitude, and so they were given it. And we continue to flesh out the specific of the final project in continued discussion with the students. In the final session, we prepared a LibGuide, which incorporated all the teaching materials we used for the semester, all the digital tools, step-by-step explanation of copyright and licensing and Creative Commons licenses, and had students consider whether to share their project publicly, what license to apply, and have them work through the Creative Commons license chooser on their own. And then we surveyed students' levels of confidence with digital tools, both before and at the end of the course, and asked them to give us information on how they wanted to share. So the focus was on having them make an informed choice about the work they created and how they wanted to share it, and also giving them the ability to change their choices pre-publication. We also had 3 community events. We had a community-built physical word crowd during our Arts and Humanities Council First Thursdays event, where many community members came up to write their thoughts about what water means to them, and affixed them to a poster we had with like a giant water drop. We also had a panel discussion by the team as part of IU Libraries Open Access Week, and in community with other external speakers who emphasize the strong community connections of Black libraries and also the role of community in decisions to publish open access. And then finally, we had a Black Art and Digital Showcase where students, this was after the class had finished, we had students come and talk about the work in their work in the class, as well as we had community artists displaying both digital artwork, print artwork, and fine art. So the students created unique digital projects surrounding the historical, cultural, socioeconomic, emotional, psychological, and political dimensions of the safety, affordability of, and access to water in Black communities. And we had students create art exhibitions. We had students do timelines. We had students who chose to do story maps. We had students who did podcasts. And the water epistles, that project can serve as one model for bridging access and opportunity divides through arts and digital community engagement. It really helps solidify the libraries a place as some way of educational persistence, adapting to new tools, and it serves as a living online archive which maintains communal accessibility and perpetual alterability, because what was shared were given different Creative Commons licenses, so they can be reused and adapted. Students' confidence in using digital technology as creators increased over the course, as well as their ability to understand their role in recognizing and addressing social issues, and their confidence in using technology to raise awareness about social issues. Students also felt that the format prioritized student learning and allowed them to think critically about issues while acquiring new knowledge and practical skills. And I just want to show exactly where that is. I'm going to, I think I had a request to make the screen larger when I screen share. So let's see. Get the screen share. So this is the section called Letters to Ourselves, the Water Epistle. That's the poster that we use in the community project. And each of these lead out to student projects that they created themselves for the final project for the course. We think one of the most telling things is that the students proudly share this information with their families, communities, and friends. And that aspect is a core tenet of Black Studies. And we had family members come to the Black Arts and Digital Showcase, participate in the event, ask questions, and introduce themselves to the teaching team. I'm gonna just skip to another example featuring the lesson plans. Every summer, IU has mini university. It's for alumni. And I used this summer in mini university, the Rosewood lesson plan, because it mapped 100 years since the destruction of Rosewood, Florida. And I actually shied away from using the term white supremacy in that, in teaching that seminar, because I was unsure of my audience. Most of the people turned out to be elderly people from Bloomington and the surrounding community. And I think they were actually all white. But I didn't actually have to shy away from that, I thought. In discussing this, like they immediately went to the issue of public memory, of erasure, of white supremacy, of white privilege, and questioning, why some of them had heard of the Rosewood Massacre through PBS and through National Public Radio specials. So again, that power of storytelling, but most of them hadn't heard of it. And we went through the timeline and we went through some of the scholarly articles that I had printed out and brought to the session, one of which details violent destruction of Black communities by year. And, they zeroed in on what was happening in 1919, which is a year we call Red Summer, because there were so many attacks on so many Black communities. So though this was a class of elderly persons, they understood it. They participated in discussing the ways that white supremacy and white privilege has shaped the United States and how it's impacted Black communities and persons of lower social classes over hundreds of years, about the financial exclusion. They recognized the erasure that had happened because many of them had never heard of Rosewood, and they connected it to the societal challenges that we are having today and the whole movement for continued erasure. And they even connected it to, the settler colonial project in other places in the world. So that was another way we were able to leverage the digital resourcing community. And then the final project that I want to share is the creation of an open pedagogy reader. And let me try to get the new share. I hope everybody can see this. So for over a year, we worked with a professor, Oscar Patron, on an open pedagogy project. And just as a reminder, we're putting learners into a position of co-production of knowledge. The work is then shared digitally with an open license, where the public can access it. And in this case, we had this was primarily master's and PhD students create a reader. They had to find an open access article and do a review of it, pose questions to be answered. So it was an educational resource. Okay. So the student comment at the end of it illustrates the value of co-production. And essentially what they said to us is that they really enjoyed being able to work on a project that resulted in a publication. It felt good to know that their work wasn't just for class, their own learning. It wasn't just I'm not going to write a paper and then it's going to be discarded, even though writing papers is important, but that their work would also hopefully help others. And they especially loved that it was open access, that the public would be able to have access to, this scholarly work and their own interpretations of it. So in conclusion, in their mission to provide access to all, libraries should take a values-based approach with community as a core value. Open pedagogy and digital community engagement hold promise for a trustworthy scholarly communication where participation and co-production are prioritized. As an academic librarian, our communities may mostly be with faculty or in the classroom, but we can also reach the wider community with digital tools. And if we use reciprocal, co-creative processes, strive for equitable civic engagement and center community, libraries will remain foundational to society as spaces for knowledge production and acquisition, at sites that offer opportunities for co-creation and collaboration, and providing ways to engage different worlds and ways of being across multiple time and places. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Willa, for that talk. You're getting comments throughout about just how fascinating and in-depth the sites that you and your colleagues have produced are. We would like to take the opportunity to open this up to a question and answer session. And just to remind all the participants that we are using stacked questioning. So we invite and encourage individuals who identify as BIPOC to preface their questions with a / so that we can provide and ensure space for everyone in the conversation. So please do that, and I would encourage you to put your questions into the Q&A.
I am sorry that my video seems to have been disconnected throughout. I didn't notice that as I was talking, but hopefully everybody was able to see the shared screen at least.
Tawana Hajgig writes that thanks you so much, Willa. This was an informative and such an important work you were all doing. Kenya would be so happy that you were the first, also being a fellow Afro-Caribbean librarian.
And you know, I think it's I wanted to just loop back to what I said, you know, at the beginning, that about our internal community as well as librarians being really important. And it seems like my video has gone astray again. I'm not sure why that's happening. Yeah, so I thank you for your comment and that support. Okay, so
Tawana also asks, what has been the biggest obstacle to doing this work? What has been the most rewarding part of doing this work as well?
So I think the most rewarding part of doing this work is the feedback from student employees, as well as the students who we were working with in the classroom. I think one of the things that touched me the most was we had a Black student who came, we employed him just as he started program. And by the end of the project, he was like, I can really see a space for myself in librarianship. I'm gonna try to switch cameras because I'm not sure why this keeps going off. So let me. I do want to get to the questions though, so I might just have to ignore what's happening.
No worries.
The video, I'm sorry. Let me just grab them from the top. Can you talk a bit about what technical tools or software? So with the Language Liberation digital resource that was built on Omeka X, and that Omeka X is managed by Digital Connection Services here at IU Libraries. We also use Timeline.js a lot to create the timelines, which could then be embedded in Omeka X. We use Audacity to create audio versions of the text on our pages and embed those. I'm just checking that there's no more stack questions. What keeps you excited and engaged in this research and practitioner space? So I get irritated when people say things that show that there's a lack of information. I don't get irritated at them, I get irritated by the lack of information. And that is kind of what drives me. And a lot of the time, it was actually friends back in the Caribbean who were saying things that I'm like, no, this is not the perception that you have through the media is not what actually happened. And realizing that it's not just them, there's a lot of people who think that way, and that's what really drives me to keep doing that work. I also do have to manage how much I put into it. And so what I do is I do exactly what's in my job description. And then aside from that, I only do what brings me joy. Critical race theory, open textbook. What role did the library play? So first, I created a Canvas course in open pedagogy for the professor to take, which had assignments, for lack of a better word, that scaffolded the design and development of what the open pedagogy project would be for the classroom. And then once we refined those, we had a consultation with the copyright librarian to understand copyright and Creative Commons licensing. And then we agreed on what the project would be. I created a LibGuide that was then for use in the classroom with the students, explaining open access, open educational resources, open pedagogy, accessibility in creating open educational resources, and copyright and Creative Commons licensing. And the library, the university actually provides the Pressbooks platform on which the Critical Race Theory open textbook was published. What are some things that you would like to do differently on any subsequent similar project? For some of the projects, the water epistles, what I learned from that is create the LibGuide early on before it's time to go into the classroom. And I was then able to apply that in the CRT Open Reader, Open Pedagogy project. So that's definitely one thing I learned from. I also would say better compensation for students, because we lost one of our key researchers because they just, they went to a better paid position, but he continued volunteer on our project because he loved it so much. How long did it take to pull the resources together for the digital collection? It took about a year, and unbeknownst to me, projects like this apparently usually take minimum 2 years. We did use a lot of project management resources. I use Trello a lot. I'm a certified Agile project manager, so I put a lot of those skills to use in just defining what's the minimum viable project, what are the incremental steps, what's the most important things to get done so that we could go live on target. Feel free to connect with me after this webinar, wtavern@iu.edu. Then also feels brave in the current climate where we see so much opposition to work around race. Has that been an issue for you, or do you feel supported in your curricular work? I agree. We've actually had to take down people's dissertations out of our repository because they're open access and people find it and target them. It has not been an issue for me, but I acknowledge that I have a certain amount of privilege. Also, because I'm not an American, and always in the back of my mind is that if things get heated, I can go back to where I come from, which a man in my neighborhood once told me to do when I was out walking and not bothering anybody. But my library has been supportive. My head of department has been really, really supportive and an advocate with the library's administration for just continued funding of this project. And the libraries have thrown the funding behind it. We initially applied to the University Racial Justice Research Fund, and they turned it down. There were a variety of reasons. At the time, I was on a fixed-term contract, not on the tenure track. I wasn't eligible. I added a collaborator. They still didn't feel that it fit within their grant funding project, but through advocacy of my department head, we got internal funding and continuing internal funding from the library. How do you think we can better integrate your work more broadly in curriculum and library instruction, or perhaps more broadly introduce to the teaching faculty so that they are more conversant in the work? That is a challenge. There's been a number of studies that speak about the absence of sort of scholarly communication topics in curricula. I think making open resources maybe about how this relates to curriculum and library instruction, and people have been doing some of that. There's some courses on Library Juice Academy for sure that I know, but of course those might, they're for professional development, and students in library school might not have funding to go take a Library Juice course, so maybe some more open courses on that would help. Did I answer the second part? I'm not sure. If I didn't, feel free to nudge me. With the current political climate in some states where they have removed or banned books from libraries and axed jobs focus based on CRT and disparities, what are those in the field doing to protect history and preserve their jobs, etc.? So, ALA has a whole section that's dedicated to collecting stories about initiatives to ban books. So for lobbying with federal and state governments about these policies, with bringing them to light in the public sphere. But libraries are doing what, as we have always done, making sure the information is not lost, supplementing the mainstream curriculum with things that have been erased by projects like these. I know that there is like a Google Doc where people create just a huge list of Black digital humanities projects. In terms of preserving their jobs, I'm not sure I can answer that, and so for that, I apologize. Thank you for your comment about the presentation, and I do hope that I really did honor tenure in the process.
These are wonderful questions and a great discussion. Are there any sort of final questions that individuals would like to submit? Again, please use the /. Want to know how to support your work?
I haven't thought too deeply about that, but I do enjoy speaking about. So if you know of other opportunities that that I may have for bringing this kind of work to light, I'd appreciate you passing them my way. And if you know of other projects that are similar, please do pass it on. We love to link up to other critical digital collections and critical digital humanities projects from our land wealth liberation resource.
Well, thank you, Willa. And I'd like to just use this opportunity to briefly mention, in that spirit of supporting work, that Yale University is also accepting applications right now for the Kenya S. Flash residency here. And this is a position for an entry-level career librarian, a 3-year position through which they can learn about and actively contribute to supporting the library staff and its strategic, inclusive ways that foster positive and sustainable organizational cultural change in our services, spaces, programs, collections, communities, and academic research through Yale's DEIA efforts. So I would encourage participants, if you or others know of somebody who may be interested in this, to certainly reach out, and I will put the link in the chat as well. I will turn it over to my my colleague Sarah for some closing remarks. Thank you again.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Wanted to just take this opportunity to send a few thanks out. I wanted to first thank the Flash family. It's been a pleasure to work on this committee and to present this very interesting lecture in librarianship. I want to thank Willa for taking the time to present that with us today. And also all my committee members who helped with that today. I've got, so that this came from two groups coming together, the American Library Association's Government Documents Roundtable and the Association of College and Research Libraries section, Politics, Policy, and International Relations. And below, I've got the names and contact information for the committee members who helped bring this 2022-2023 annual lecture event, and as well as Willa's contact information, Willa Liburd Tavernier. I think with that, I'm thinking that's everybody who I was supposed to thank. Oh, wait, no, it's thank you all for coming and staying with us to the end of this lecture event. And I'm really looking forward to putting this on again next year and having more very interesting and important projects highlighted. All right, so let's see, residency. Okay, so there is a question. Oh, thank you. Okay, yes. So I just wanted to leave us with this beautiful picture of yellow carnations. And yeah, I'm not sure. Did any of the other panelists want to jump in, or I wonder if you could speak more. Okay, and then thank you. Yeah, thank you to the Flash family too. All right, so I'll look at my chat. Oh, if anyone does have suggestions for future speakers, you can contact one of the committee members, and oh, yeah, there's our information again. And so we do hope that this is going to be the first in many for this annual lecture series, the KenUS Flash Virtual Lecturer Series in Librarianship. And without much more pausing, I think it's that's it for today for me.
Thank you all for the opportunity.